The arrangement was simple. Neve would come to the Morrow territory for 3 months as the Alpha's chosen mate. She would be present at the formal functions. She would be introduced to the allied packs. She would stand beside Alpha Davin Morrow at the border meeting, and the rival Alpha would see a man with a stable line and a chosen mate and would calculate that the war was not worth the cost. After 3 months, she would go home. She had agreed to this because 3 villages were going to burn if someone did not do something practical, and she was a practical person. She had agreed because the compensation was enough to rebuild Caldwell's medical stores for 2 years. She had agreed because it was temporary and contained. And she was not the kind of woman who fell apart over temporary and contained situations. She had not been told about Iris, or rather, she had been told in the briefing. The Alpha has a daughter, 5 years old. She is aware of the arrangement. She had processed this the way she processed logistics, noted, filed, moved on. She had not understood what aware of the arrangement meant when applied to a 5-year-old. She understood on the first morning. Iris had appeared at her door before dawn, in her night clothes, holding a drawing she had made. She had held it up. It was a picture of 3 people. A tall person, a medium person, and a small person, all holding hands. Iris had said, "That is Papa, that is you, and that is me." Neve had looked at the drawing. She had looked at the child. She had said, carefully, "Did your Papa tell you about me?" Iris had said, "He said you are his mate." She had looked at Neve with dark eyes that were her father's eyes. "Are you going to be my new mama?" Neve had stood in the doorway in the early morning and understood, for the first time, that the arrangement was not as contained as she had believed. She had said, "I am here for a while. Let us start there." Iris had accepted this and walked in and climbed onto the chair by the window and looked at the view and told Neve that the pine tree on the left was the best one because it had a bird in it. Neve had stood in the middle of the room and thought about 3 months. She had thought about what 3 months looked like from the inside of a 5-year-old's understanding of time. She had thought about the drawing with the 3 people holding hands. She had known, standing there, that she was in significant trouble. She had not known how significant. "My name is Sansa. Welcome to Sansa Romance Oracle. This is the story of a fake arrangement that nobody told a 5-year-old was fake. And what happened when a child loved something into being real." Chapter 1. The first week. The protocol of the arrangement had been clear. Separate rooms. Civil presence at shared meals. Formal appearance at the border meeting in 6 weeks. After that, a gradual public distance that would read as a natural growing apart rather than a fabricated ending. Davin had explained all of this at their first formal meeting in his study with the directness she had come to understand was simply how he communicated everything, not coldness, efficiency. He said what he meant and expected the same in return. She had respected this. She had said, "I understand the terms." He had said, "If at any point the arrangement becomes uncomfortable, you can leave early. The compensation is yours regardless." She had said, "I am not easily made uncomfortable." He had looked at her with the look she was also learning. The one that meant he was taking in more information than his face acknowledged. He had said, "Good." They had shaken hands. It had been entirely professional. And then Iris had happened. Iris had decided, on the second morning, that Neve's hair needed to be looked at. This was not negotiable. She had appeared with a small calm and a focused expression, and Neve had found herself sitting on the edge of the bed while a 5-year-old examined her hair with the thoroughness of a medical assessment. She had said, "What are you doing?" Iris had said, "Checking for tangles." Mama always had tangles in the morning. She said they happened in the night. Neve had said, "I see." Iris had said, "You also have tangles." She had calmed them out with the careful attention of someone performing a service they took seriously. Neve had sat very still. She had thought about a woman she had never met who had done this same thing every morning and who was not here anymore. She had said, gently, "Your mama taught you to do this." Iris had said. She said hair needed looking after. She had finished the section she was working on. "You have nice hair," Neve had said. "Thank you," Iris had said. "Papa's hair does not have tangles. He says wolves don't get them." She had sounded skeptical about this claim. "I think he just says that." Neve had thought about Davin's carefully arranged hair at breakfast and thought Iris might have a point. She had not said this. She had said, "Thank you for checking my hair." Iris had said, "I will do it every morning." And she had. Every morning for the first week, before Neve had fully woken. Iris was at the door with her calm and her assessment eyes and her running commentary on the state of the tangles. Neve had mentioned this to Davin on the 5th morning at breakfast. She had said, "Carefully, Iris seems to have decided we have a morning routine." He had looked up. She had said, "I want to make sure this is appropriate, given the circumstances." He had looked at his daughter, who was telling the kitchen staff about a bird she had seen and did not appear to be listening. He had said, "She has not had a morning routine since her mother died." Neve had said nothing. He had said, "I should have considered this more carefully before. I apologize. If it is not something you," she had said. "It is fine." She had said it before she had fully decided it was. She had looked at Iris explaining the bird to the cook. She had said, "She is not in my way." He had looked at her. She had looked at her tea. She had said, "She is not." "That is all I am saying." He had been quiet for a moment. He had said, quietly, "Thank you." She had said, "Do not thank me. She is 5 years old. She is not asking for much." He had looked at his tea. She had looked at hers. Iris had come back to the table with a full report on the bird. They had both listened to all of it. Chapter 2. The border meeting. The border meeting was on a cold Saturday in the 5th week. Neve wore the formal clothes the Morrow household had prepared and stood beside Davin in the long hall and met the eyes of the rival Alpha across the table with the composed steadiness she brought to anything that required it. The rival Alpha was a man called Fen. Large, watchful, the kind of still that came from spending a great deal of time calculating. He looked at Neve the way he looked at everything, as a variable to be assessed. She looked back. She did not look away first. Davin, beside her, had not moved, but she felt him register it. The meeting proceeded. Territorial boundaries. Trade agreements. The language of men who were deciding whether the cost of conflict outweighed the cost of restraint. And then Fen had said, "Across the table, your mate." New arrangement. Davin had said, "Yes." Fen had looked at Neve. He had said, "From where?" She had said, "Caldwell." The border healers. He had said, "A healer." She had said yes. He had looked at her for a long time with the calculating eyes. Then Iris had appeared. Nobody had known she was there. She had apparently followed them from the estate, through the formal grounds, into the long hall, in the manner of a 5-year-old who had decided she was coming and had not consulted anyone. She appeared at Neve's side. She took Neve's hand. She looked at Fen across the table with the clear, dark eyes that were her father's eyes and her own certainty. She said, "That is my mama." The long hall was very quiet. Fen looked at the child. He looked at the joined hands. He looked at Neve. He looked at Davin. Something shifted in his calculation. A man with a chosen mate was a man with a stable alliance. A man with a daughter who called that mate Mama and walked into formal border meetings to stand beside her was a man who had something real. Neve had not moved. She had not let go of Iris's hand. She had looked at Davin over the child's head. His expression was very still. In his eyes, something she did not have a name for yet. The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. Fen had agreed to the boundary terms. The war was not worth the cost. In the corridor afterward, Davin had crouched to Iris's level. He had said, "You were supposed to stay at the estate." Iris had said, "I wanted to see Neve." He had said, "You walked all the way here alone." Iris had said, "The guard came with me." She had looked at him with the patient expression of a child, explaining something obvious. "I did not come alone. I came with Garrett." Garrett, behind them, had looked at the ceiling. Davin had looked at Neve. She had looked at Iris. She had said, "Why did you want to see me?" Iris had said, "Because the big man was going to be there, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." Neve had looked at the child. She had said, "I was all right." Iris had said, "I know. But I wanted to make sure." She had taken Neve's hand again, satisfied, and begun walking back toward the estate. Neve had stood in the corridor. Davin had been watching her. She had not looked at him. She had followed Iris. She had needed a moment before she could look at anyone with a neutral face. The moment required longer than she expected. Chapter 3, 5 weeks remaining. She started counting down at week 4. 5 weeks remaining. 4. 3. She did not let herself stop counting, because stopping the countdown was the same as stopping the fiction. And the fiction was the only thing keeping the arrangement from becoming something she could not manage. She was managing it less well than she had planned. This was Iris's fault. Iris had established, over the past 7 weeks, the following non-negotiable facts of daily life: morning hair assessment, evening story. The specific chair at the kitchen table, that was Neve's chair, and no one else's. The requirement that Neve attend the inspection of any notable bird, beetle, or stick that Iris encountered during the day, because these things were interesting, and interesting things should be shared. Neve had attended every inspection. She had developed opinions about birds. This was not the problem. The problem was Davin. Davin had also been present at several of the bird inspections. He had been present because Iris had simply appeared at his study door and said, "Papa, come and look." And he had come. Because it was apparent to Neve that the word no had not worked on Iris in 5 years, and Davin had stopped attempting it. They had stood together at the edge of the garden, looking at a bird that Iris was describing in considerable detail, and Neve had said something about the wing pattern, and Davin had said something she had not expected about migratory patterns, and Iris had looked between them with deep satisfaction. They had looked at each other. They had looked away. This had been happening with increasing frequency. She found him in the library on the first evening of week 8. He was reading. She came in for the medical reference book she needed. He looked up. She said, "I will only be a moment." He said, "You do not have to hurry." She found the book. She should have left. She sat in the chair across from him instead. She was not sure why. He set down his book. They sat in the library, in the quiet of the estate at night, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in 8 weeks. And that was the problem precisely. She said, 3 weeks, he said. Yes, she said, the arrangement. He said, I know what you mean. She said, Iris. He said, I know. She said, she does not know it is 3 weeks. He said, no. She said, we should tell her. He was quiet. She said, she should have time to understand what is happening before it happens. He said, yes. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She said, how do we tell her? He said, I have been thinking about that, she said. What have you been thinking? He looked at his hands. He said, I have been thinking about what is true and what is pretend, and how those categories have become less clear to me than they were 8 weeks ago. She looked at him. He looked up. He said, I am not saying this to complicate the arrangement. I am saying it because you asked what I have been thinking, and I am trying to be honest. She said, Davin. He said, yes. She said, what are you actually saying? He looked at her. He said, I am saying that Iris is not the only one who forgot it was pretend. The library was very quiet. The fire made a small sound. She said carefully, we had terms. He said, I know. She said, the arrangement was clear. He said, I know. He held her gaze. I drew the terms. I know exactly what they say. I also know that I have stood beside you at a border meeting, and in a garden looking at birds, and in this library in the dark, and I have not once, since week 3, been able to locate the line between the arrangement and something else. She breathed. She said, you should have said something sooner. He said, I was not sure it was fair to say it at all. You agreed to terms. You came here for Caldwell's medical stores and to stop a war. Not for. He stopped. She said, not for what? He said, quietly, not for this. She looked at the fire. She thought about 8 weeks. She thought about morning hair assessments that she had looked forward to. About a 5-year-old walking into a formal border meeting to stand beside her because she wanted to make sure she was all right. She thought about a man who came to bird inspections because his daughter said come and look, and who had read 3 books in 8 weeks on migratory patterns, so he had something to contribute. She thought about the drawing. The 3 people holding hands. She said, I came for Caldwell. He said, I know. She said, and I stayed for. She stopped. He waited. She said, I stopped counting the weeks at week 6. He was very still. She said, I noticed I had stopped, and I started again deliberately. But I had stopped. He looked at her. She looked at the fire. She said, I do not know what to do with that. He said, neither do I. He said it simply. But I thought you should know that you are not managing something I am indifferent to. She looked at him. He looked back. He said, whatever you decide about the 3 weeks, I want you to decide it knowing that. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, we still need to tell Iris, he said. Yes. She said, "Together." He said, "Yes." She said, "Tomorrow." He said, "Yes." She stood up. She looked at him. She said, "I stopped at week 6. He said, "I stopped at week 3. She held his gaze. She said, "Good night, Davin." He said, "Good night, Neve." She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. She thought about week 3 and what had happened in week 3 that she could now, looking back, identify as the moment she had stopped being able to find the line. She thought about a library and a migratory pattern and a man who had listened to every single bird report with the same attention he gave to territorial negotiations. She thought about what it meant that he had stopped at week 3. She thought about what she was going to do about it. She had one idea. It required talking to Iris first. Chapter 4. What Iris already knew, they told her the next morning. Davin had asked Neve how to begin, and she had said simply and clearly, and as much truth as she could hold, which was the only way she knew how to do anything. They sat at the kitchen table. Iris had her porridge. She was in the morning phase that required several minutes of eating before she was ready for conversation, which they both knew because they had both observed it for 8 weeks. Neve waited for the second stage of the porridge. Then she said, "Iris, we need to tell you something." Iris looked up. Neve looked at Davin. He looked back at her. She looked at Iris. She said, "When I came here, it was because your papa and I made an arrangement to help with the border situation." She kept her voice steady. The arrangement was for 3 months. Iris ate a spoonful of porridge. Neve said, 3 months means I would go back to Caldwell. After 3 months." Iris looked at her. She said, "When is 3 months?" Neve said, 3 weeks from now. Iris looked at her porridge. The kitchen was quiet. Neve waited. She had prepared for crying. For the particular devastation of a 5-year-old who had been given information she had not wanted. She had prepared what she would say. Iris looked up. She said, "But you are our mate." Neve said, carefully, "The arrangement." Iris said, "You are Papa's mate." She said it with complete certainty. "I can smell it." The kitchen went very still. Davin said, "Iris." Iris looked at him. She said, "Papa, I can smell it." She tapped her nose with one finger. "It has been there since week 3. Neve looked at Davin. Davin looked at the table. Iris looked between them. She said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious, "Wolves can smell the mate bond when it starts." She paused. "It started at week 3 for Papa." She looked at Neve. "Yours started later. Maybe week 6. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Neve said, very quietly, "You have known this whole time." Iris said, "Yes." She ate more porridge. Neve said, "Why did you not say anything?" Iris put down her spoon. She looked at Neve with her father's dark eyes and the particular wisdom of a 5-year-old who had decided to let things happen at their own pace. She said, "Because grown-ups take longer." She picked up her spoon again. She said, "I knew it was real. I just had to wait for you to know it too." Davin made a sound. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a man who had been outwitted by a 5-year-old and had realized it some time ago. Neve looked at him. He was looking at his daughter with the expression she had cataloged over 8 weeks. The one he used for things that reached the place he kept very carefully contained. She looked at Iris. She said, "So when you came to the border meeting?" Iris said, "I wanted to make sure you were all right." She paused. "And I wanted the big man to see that you were ours." Neve pressed her hand over her mouth. She held it there for a moment. Then she said, "Iris." Iris said, "Yes." Neve said, "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met." Iris considered this. She said, "I know." She went back to her porridge. She said, "Are you staying?" Neve looked at Davin. He looked at her. She said, "I think that is a conversation your papa and I need to have." Iris said, "You can have it now. I am right here." Davin said, "Iris." Iris said, "I am just saying." He said, "We will talk later." She said, "Fine." She finished her porridge. "But I already know what you are both going to say." She put her bowl on the bench. She left the kitchen. In the corridor, loud enough to be clearly heard, I knew it was real the whole time. The kitchen was quiet. Neve looked at the door. She said, "She has known since week 3. Davin said, "Yes." She said, "She was managing us." He said, "Yes." She said, "A 5-year-old was managing us." He said, "She is very capable." Neve looked at the table. She started laughing. It was not a managed laugh or a polite one. It was the real one, the kind that came when something was so precisely and perfectly true that there was no other response to it. Davin watched her. Then he laughed too. They sat at the kitchen table and laughed, and the estate was warm, and outside the window, the pine tree. That was the best one, because it had a bird in it stood in the morning light. When it had settled, Neve looked at him. She said, week 3. She said, "What happened in week 3? He said, "You argued with me about the Eastern trade terms at the council table, and you were completely correct, and you did not apologize for it." She said, "That is what did it." He said, "That is what did it." She looked at the table. She said, "I am not going back to Caldwell in 3 weeks." He said, "No." She said, "I need you to say it. Not assume it. Say it." He looked at her. He said, "Stay. Not for the arrangement. Not for the border situation. Stay because this is real and I want it to be real, and Iris has known that since week 3, and we have both been slower than a 5-year-old about it." She said, "That is accurate." He said, "Yes." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes to staying." She said, "Yes to all of it." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over. "From the corridor, I told you." They looked at the door. Iris appeared in the frame. She looked at their hands. She said, "Finally." She went back to her room. Epilogue. What was always real, 3 months later. The month that would have been the end. Neve was in the garden. She was looking at the bird in the best pine tree, which was a different bird from the bird that had been there at the beginning, but which Iris had determined was equally excellent, and therefore the tree retained its status. Iris was beside her. She was explaining something about the bird. Neve was listening. This was her life now. She had written to Caldwell. She had arranged for the medical stores to be supplemented. Davin had made sure of that, and for a second healer to take the village's primary care. She went back once a month for 3 days. She had her patients and her records and her work, and they were hers, and they remained hers. She had this too. The estate and the pine trees, and the morning hair assessments and the kitchen table, and the council room, where she argued about trade terms and was not asked to apologize for being right. She had Davin. She had Iris. She thought about the arrangement sometimes, the clean terms, the 3 months, the separate rooms, and the formal appearances, and the line between the arrangement and something else that she had not been able to find since week 6. She thought about a 5-year-old with a calm who had known since week 3. She thought about a drawing. 3 people holding hands. She had kept the drawing. It was on the wall of the room that had been her guest room and was now simply her room. The one she shared with a man who had stopped at week 3 and had been waiting patiently for her to stop too. She looked at the bird. She said, to Iris, without looking away from it, you knew from the beginning. Iris said, yes. She said, you knew it was real before we did. Iris said, yes. She said, how? Iris was quiet for a moment. She said, because you looked at the bird. Neve looked at her. Iris said, the first morning, I showed you the bird, and you looked at it properly. She paused. People who are pretending look at the bird for long enough to be polite. You actually looked at it. She looked at the tree. She said, Papa looked at it properly too. That was week 3. Neve looked at the bird. She thought about that first morning. About a 5-year-old at her door before dawn with a drawing of 3 people. About looking at a bird in a tree and finding it genuinely interesting. She said, I did not know that mattered. Iris said, everything matters. She said it the way she said most things, simply, as a fact that was just true and did not require decorating. Neve looked at the tree. She heard Davin's step behind them. He had come from the study. He came to find them in the garden in the late morning, most days, with the regularness of someone who had made a habit of a thing and no longer tracked whether he was doing it. He stood beside Neve. He looked at the bird. He said, migratory. It will be gone by winter. Iris said, I know. She paused. But it is here now. She said it entirely simply. It is here now. Neve looked at the bird. She looked at the estate behind them, and the pine trees, and the morning that was entirely ordinary and entirely hers. She thought about 3 months, about clean terms and separate rooms, and a fiction that a 5-year-old had seen through from the first morning because Neve had looked at a bird properly. She reached out. She took Davin's hand. He looked at her. She looked at the bird. She said, it is here now. He closed his hand around hers. Iris looked between them with the satisfaction she had been wearing since the morning at the kitchen table. She had known it was real the whole time. She had just waited for them to know it too. She went back to looking at the bird. It was an excellent bird. The tree was still the best one. Everything was exactly as it should be. That is the end of She Was Chosen as the Alpha's fake mate to stop a war. Nobody told the child it was pretend. If the moment Iris said, I knew it was real the whole time, I just had to wait for you to know it too, broke you completely. You are exactly the person I make these stories for. More stories are on this channel, all completely original, all made only here. My name is Sansa. I will see you for the next one.